everybody, Hugh Kellenberger here. It's Dustin Dopirak, Zachary, Osterman from inside the hall in the second row. We are sitting here in the seats that Gus Johnson and Quinn Buckner once inhabited. Dustin,
this
Dustin
is the
feels like
moment in my life.
Dustin
actually.
feels like a champion.
I do.
I feel like just screaming things. I will resist.
Rise and fire.
Ha ha!
Yeah,
Felt
you
good.
didn't resist. That
Felt good.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel a Big Ten Network commercial coming on.
And
anyways, let's talk about Indiana's third straight loss. They fall to 9-5 on the season, 0-1 in Big Ten play. A loss to Penn State that was certainly discouraging for a team that thought that it had corrected the mistakes of Las Vegas.
Yeah, no, they clearly didn't. They did pretty much the exact same thing, and there were ways in which it looked worse, especially early. I mean, they obviously had plenty of defensive breakdowns in Vegas, but the shots, I know that the shots in Northern Iowa were not that wide open. You know, there were a lot of just, shots where just somebody collapsed, basically, and, somebody was on help defense or whatever, and there was a shooter hanging out on the wing that just had a wide open look. And there were several of those. I think there were 7 of the first 8. Definitely, I know there were at least 7 for the first 10. And, just had wide open looks, busted open a 14-point lead. Indiana spent most of the rest of the game making up for that, and by the time they got to late in the second half, they were pretty much spent after that, and just didn't make the plays that Penn State did.
Yeah, I mean, Tom talked a lot during his post-game press conference about getting over the hump of not falling into the same mistakes and falling into the same kind of roles. Zach, do you feel like he's in line with that? Do you think that's a problem?
Well, I guess my thing was that it seemed kind of incongruous. It was. We're not going to go back to where we were. Like, we're not. Right. I mean, I think his words were like, "We're not going to relive that." But then it was kind of like, but you also say by your own admission, you're reliving that. You're doing. You are suffering through a lot of the same problems that led to 16 wins in 2 years, and certainly there were mitigating factors then that I think a lot of fans anyway would argue don't exist, at least not to the extremes that they did over those first 2 years. So that, I mean, those two statements kind of seem to kind of conflict with each other.
Yeah.
I mean, because we aren't going to do what we were doing, but we're doing. I mean, maybe that's simplifying it too much, but that's kind of what it sounds like. Anyway.
I was surprised, I guess, and I asked him this, and he kind of went with it. He didn't dispute, I guess, what I was saying. I said, well, he said it's the old scars and the old wounds of not being able to, of coming close and not being able to get the win. And I said, is it really the old scars, or is it just the scars from Vegas? I mean, is it more, do you think they're really considering what might have happened, a year ago or 2 years ago, or are they just considering what happened last week? Is that what's discouraging them? Is, probably. And, then he went on to something else. And so I don't really know if that's a logical explanation or not to use this game and say, okay, like this comes from, previous years or whatever. This is a byproduct of things that happened last season and the season before. I mean, I think personally it's more of a product of what happened last week. It's the third time in a row that you've fallen behind, and it's the third time in a row that the same thing has happened. I think it's less about I was really surprised he went to the, somewhat distant past as opposed to the very, very recent past.
Yeah, I mean, it's all 3 games. You're right. It's been the same thing.
It's the same pattern.
You fall behind by double digits early, and then you have to expend so much energy to get over the game.
Yeah.
Is it a repeat?
And they did get back.
They did get back. But
it's
not being able to get over the hump a repeat of the past, or is it simply we spent so much energy to get it to a 2-point game? We just don't have any left.
Yeah, no, I think it was more that. I think, I guess there were a lot of differences, I guess. I don't recall a lot of those games where they had comebacks in the past. Them literally getting it all the way back to where it was even game. And where it's you make shots and you stop shots and you win the game. They weren't still 2 buckets away, 3 buckets away this time. And that's usually what it was before when they would have a comeback. It would still be, it's like, oh, well, it's a ball game now. It's interesting, but it's still a 6 or 8 point game, and the other team hits a shot, and all of a sudden it's double digits again. I mean, in this case, it was, literally Indiana had the lead back. Yeah. And it's just literally these last 3 games have been like this, where they've either had a lead, or they've been tied, or they've been down by 2. in none of these 3 games did they face the sort of deficit where one shot buries you. But yet they just went through stretches where they couldn't get anything done offensively, where they couldn't, stop really much of anything defensively after they'd already made their comeback. And it's obviously it's a problem in a lot of ways. I mean, in part of it was, I think, part of it definitely was expending so much on the comeback. But again, part of it is just not making a shot when you had to make a shot, not making a stop when you had to make a stop.
But I think at the same time, I do think you could argue. I mean, that, and it's never been so black and white. It's never been. I mean, you're right. In the last 2 years, it's never been Indiana has the lead, and now, watch what happens next. But there were those moments. I mean, that first year that Crean was here, I mean, they had I think a 19-point lead on Michigan in the first half. It was I think 18 at halftime, and it kind of slipped away. But they had several of those moments late in the game, trying to preserve the lead. And then Minnesota here, Penn State here. They had several of those moments where they made a little run. They brought it back to like 6.
Right.
And then it was, okay, if this team can just put together one more stop, they've got all the momentum, and somebody's got a hot hand, and then what happened tonight would happen. And again, it wasn't so stark, it wasn't so easy to see, but it was that same idea of when what Jeremiah Rivers called crunch time hit. They just kind of they didn't have, and maybe whether it was fatigue or whatever, there was just something missing.
Yeah.
And I do think that is something that you have to an extent, you do have to learn.
Right. I think there's an idea, not necessarily, Tom did not come out and say this phrase, but a loser's mentality. That you just get to the point where you're not a loser, but like you realize that losing isn't the end of the world. You realize the sun's still going to come up tomorrow.
Because you've seen it happen this many times.
You've seen it happen so many times that you realize your parents are still going to love you, your girlfriend's still going to love you.
Well, and there's no...
you realize it's not the end of the world. And for a college basketball program, that's a really tough thing to overcome.
There's no one guy on this team that and we've talked about this a lot, and Thomas kind of tried to beat around this without just coming out and saying it. There's not one guy on this team, either in action or in word, can just kind of summon everyone. I think Creek was becoming that guy last year before the injury, and I think Watford has tried at times, thinking back to like the Kentucky game, to be that guy this year.
Right.
But you have some guys who try to be more vocal on the floor, and you have some guys that can score in bunches, but you don't have the one guy who can just... I mean, thinking back to what Verdell Jones did against Minnesota here last year.
Yeah, no, exactly.
You don't have the guy who can do that.
No. I mean, Verdell, interestingly, talked a lot about guys going off page, and then I asked him, okay, well, do you include yourself in that? He says, absolutely, I consider myself at the forefront of that, and he pretty much admitted, me going one-on-one is probably the reason we lost in Vegas. But, he brought that up, and then we kind of took it over to Jordan Hulse, and they both, sort of talked about how this team is not in a situation where a guy can decide just to go one-on-one, just to, that he can decide to just be that guy and try to will anybody to victory. Tonight certainly wasn't a case where that could be done, because Christian was battling back spasms. We thought he was sick all night, but apparently it was more of a back injury, and that kind of makes sense. He just looked weak. Yeah. He just looked worn down in some ways, like just listless, lethargic. And, you knew there had to be something. There was no way that he just came out and was that bored to be at a basketball game. He looked just beat up and just not right. And so he couldn't do anything. He was 1 for 5 for 3 points. Obviously, Verdell's just been off. Since the little ankle injury, he just hasn't been there. He had a much better night tonight than he had in Vegas. He was 5 for 12 for 15 points, 3 assists, 1 turnover. That was a lot better, but he's still, not in the position, not playing like a guy who can take over late. And obviously, we've talked about Maurice Creek plenty of times about what he's not capable of doing right now. And those are the 3 guys that you could even remotely consider being that guy. I mean, obviously Jordan Hulse is shooting it extremely well, but you're not going to tell him just go take the shot wherever it is. If you're double teamed, just dribble and break somebody down and make a play. Jordan Hulse still needs something to happen for him to get a look.
Yeah.
So
we'll go ahead and wrap it up real fast, guys. Real quick, how many Big Ten games does this team win?
Maybe 3.
I have no idea anymore. I mean, I really have no idea anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, the roles.
This is one of the ones they had to get if they were going to get one.
Yeah, and it's not even just as a team. I mean, I think to the roles that I envisioned for different guys this season, they've all been blown up. For the most part.
Mostly,
I have no idea anymore.
Sounds good.
Absolutely.
As always, check out the Hoosier Scoop and Inside the Hall for your Indiana basketball coverage. We'll see you Friday for Ohio State. Oh, God.
New Year's.
Yep.